Marvin Samson is a beloved pharmaceutical industry titan with an illustrious career that has spanned 6 decades and 5 continents. Marvin and I are fellow board members of Frontier Biopharma, a European pharma CDMO which we acquired from a multinational about 5 years ago. Today, Frontier supplies world-class medicines to about 40 countries around the world. Over the years, I've had the privilege of hearing Marvin's fascinating story, and I've been thinking about ways to chronicle this and share it with our network. A pastime of mine is studying business biographies, and I can honestly say that Marvin's story would be amongst the most inspiring. Be it the tough upbringing in a single-parent immigrant home, to founding of multiple successful businesses against all odds, or leading SICOR, a publicly listed multinational pharma company, which was eventually acquired for $3.5 billion in 2003. What has underpinned all of that success is his unwavering commitment to giving back and philanthropy, which stems all the way from childhood when there was not much to give. Marvin, firstly, thank you so much for joining me in this discussion.
Pleasure.
When I describe you to others, I use a lot of descriptive words: industry titan, charismatic leader, moderately good looking, but above all, a success story. What was the defining moment for you when you realized you were successful?
I guess when I got to a point where I knew that my family was provided for, when I was able to help my children and grandchildren, and more than anything else, I was able to do a lot of good things. When you do well, you have to do good. And you mentioned philanthropy. It means a great deal to me to know that I can give back. And it feels good to give. And if I'm giving a scholarship or helping a hospital system, it makes all my hard work worthwhile.
When I look back at your various mentors and your upbringing, giving back and helping people has been a common theme. Would you agree with that, even though things were very difficult for you growing up? And you mentioned your mom was a single parent, but she still instilled those values. Is that where it started?
Yes. Yeah, it started when I was very young. You know, as you mentioned, I grew up in a poor neighborhood in Philadelphia, and my mother was raising 3 sons. I began working when I was very young, and I was very fortunate to work in a pharmacy for a man named Mickey Lev. And he was probably my first mentor. He was a surrogate father to me. I began working there when I was 10 years old, dusting shelves, putting things away, taking out the trash, whatever he wanted me to do. And I continued to work there through high school. But I learned so many lessons from him. It was a poor neighborhood. We were the first level of medical care. And so if you had a splinter in your finger or something in your eye, we took it out. One thing I learned also was that he had a heart. He was generous, he was kind. But in those days, physicians would write PP at the bottom of the prescription, meaning poor person, saying, give them a break. Mm-hmm. And so when he would see a prescription like this, he would say to me, Marvin, charge them 15, 25 cents. And if they didn't have money, he would say, just give them the medication. And I saw that, and it made me feel good. There are people around that still care, and he just wanted to make sure that people had the medication they needed.
Yeah. It sounds like that's where you first fell in love with the pharmaceutical industry. And even seeing you now at CPHI conference every year, you're like a kid in a candy store. So happy and grateful to be part of the industry, like it's your first day. What for you has made your interest and love enduring all of these decades?
I love the business I'm in. You're right. I love going to trade shows. I love meeting people. I've lived the American dream many times. And when I really think of my life in this industry has allowed me to do things that were beyond my wildest dreams. I couldn't believe that I would be where I am today. And, the lessons I learned working for Mickey, getting into the industry, have become a way of life. Many of my closest friends were people that I met through the industry. they're lifelong friends. And as you said, I've worked all over the world. I have friends all over the world, and they've become almost like family members. So I just love this business, and it's been good to me.
I think that genuine interest and love shines through in all of the conversations we have. But something else that also comes across is the deep long-term relationships you have with people that are in all four corners of the world, regardless of their background, their cultures. How do you manage to build those deep-rooted relationships and maintain them over decades?
First, you have to like the people, and I like them, and I respect them, and I admire them. And the people that I'm closest to have had very similar backgrounds to mine. They've started companies, they've been generous, they've trained people, they've mentored people, and they do good things. You know, one of the reasons I got into the generic industry was it was a very young industry when I got into it, but it was like we are now making medication available to people that in the past could not afford it. And so, it's nice to be able to make a living, work hard, do good things, all at the same time. And I really believe what we do is helping people get medication that they need badly.
When we were speaking earlier, you mentioned quite an early introduction to owning equity in a business,
Right.
which obviously has risks. How did you reconcile that with a stable, steady income to provide for your family versus, taking risk as an entrepreneur?
I think part of being an entrepreneur is taking risk. If you don't take a risk, look, you can be very complacent and happy and have a salary every week, but you'll never hit a home run. Yeah. And even I remember when I started Marsam, one of my business associates, Agnes Varis, I mentioned her name earlier, she and I would go to Europe once a year together. And on one of our trips back, she said to me, I won't curse, but she used a lot of four-letter words, but she said, you'll never hit a home run. You'll never make a lot of money working for someone else. And you have the personality and the drive and the initiative to be in business yourself. So I want you to own your own company, and I want to be your partner. And that's how Marsam started. Marsam was a very interesting company. I was, at that time, president of ESI, Elkins-Sinn. I was making a good living. Company was doing very well. We were part of a multinational. And after talking to Agnes, I realized that she was right, that if I had my own company, I can do things the way I want to do them, I would be more successful. And so she convinced me to start Marsam. I didn't have any real money in those days. And she said to me, write a business plan. How much money would it take to start another injectable business? My first thought was I didn't want to compete with Elkins-Sinn because I had been there 18 years. It was part of my life. And I didn't think it was fair to start a business to compete with my old company. So I told her I'd like to start an injectable company specializing in antibiotics, in beta-lactams, and products that Elkins-Sinn did not make. And I went home that weekend and I wrote a business plan. I never wrote a business plan before. I just thought, well, we need so much money for equipment. It's going to cost us so much per filing. Before we have our own facility, we'll need contract manufacturing. And I put this plan together, and God knows how, but I came up with $4 million. I said, if we had $4 million, we can start another business. And immediately she said, okay. I said, okay, I don't have $4 million. She said, you don't have to. You're going to run it. You're going to give it your life. You're going to have sweat equity. And the way Marsam started was that I invested $10,000.
Right.
Agnes Varis, who was a private person, had a privately owned chemical company, she invested $1 million. And the third investor was a publicly held generic company. And they invested $3 million.
Did she take it upon herself to raise all of that money? Was it her network?
It was her network.
Okay.
And so she went to this other company and she said, look, and they were a publicly held company doing a secondary stock offering.
Okay.
And in their secondary offering, under use of proceeds, they said they were going to go get into the injectable business. Because at that time, they were making tablets and capsules. The company was Bolar.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how Marsam started. Even though we all put in different amounts of money, each of us owned 1/3 of the company.
Okay, and yours primarily being the sweat equity.
Right.
Right.
And she put it together, and she was very helpful to me. She was my mentor at that time. And so that's how the company started. So we each invested different amounts of money, but we all owned 1/3 of the company. And whenever I needed anything, she was there. In fact, the night that she said, okay, we can do this, she wrote me a check for $1 million. I'd never seen $1 million check before. And so that's how Marsam started.
Did your business plan play out the way you expected?
No, because we had to build facilities.
Right.
We had to purchase equipment. We went through the $2 million number very quickly. Now, she gave me her money up front.
Right.
Bolar gave me $1 million, so I really had $2 million.
Right.
And then we were running out of money. Bolar was a little slow putting in the balance of their $3 million. And after about, I would say, a year and a half, maybe 2 years, we had exhausted most of that money. And so we had to make a decision. We started Marsam in 1985, and now it's 1987.
With no revenue?
It's very little revenue.
Okay.
Very little revenue, like $140,000.
Okay. From contract manufacturing?
Yes.
Okay.
The contract, well, more than, not just contract manufacturing, we purchased one product.
Okay.
And there was a pharma company in Philadelphia called William H. Rohr,
Mm-hmm.
and the Rohr company was known for their over-the-counter product like
Okay.
Maalox. They also had a line of injectables.
Okay.
And I knew the Rohr family, and they said, look, we don't want to be in this business, but we have customers that need these products. And they basically gave me the products and gave me the equipment. And once I did a site transfer to my facility, they were the first products we were selling. So we only had about $140,000, $150,000 in revenue. And so we had to make a decision. Where do we get extra money? Now, in the interim period, while I needed money, Agnes lent us the money. And so, in fact, I think at one time I owed her about $1.5 million. When we sat down to decide how do we raise money, we said, public or private? And so we had no idea what our company was worth. And so I went to Nomura, a Japanese bank, and they came in, they looked at our forecast, they looked at our models, and I said to them, if we sell you 25% of the company, what's it worth? Which would leave each of us, the other 3 shareholders, with 25%. And after about 2 weeks and their MBAs putting all these models together, they came back and said $10.4 million, 1987.
For the 25% or for the entire
No.
company?
For the 25%.
25%.
Which made it worth $40 million.
Wow.
Okay?
Not bad?
Not bad at all. Then I went to Smith Barney. Ben Lorello was the banker, by the way.
Right.
And I said, we want to sell 25% of our company to the public. What's it worth? And again, same thing, did all their models and came back at 10.4. One was 10.6, one was 10.4.
Pretty close.
Very close. God knows how the number
Yeah.
came up. And so we sat down with Agnes and Bob and our board members, and we said, look, we need money. This thing's going to work. We need capital. And so we talked about it, and they said, if you do a private placement, there are always strings attached. If there are investors, they're going to want board seats, and you won't have the same freedom and flexibility to run the company. And so after about a 45-minute discussion, we decided a public offering is the best way to go. And so we decided to go public.
At this point, still with about $160,000 in revenue?
Yes, but the one asset I didn't mention, I just thought of it, was right after I started Marsam, within a month after I started the company, it was announced in the pink sheet that I was leaving Elkins-Sinn and I started Marsam.
Of course, because Elkins-Sinn was also publicly listed.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And so I was contacted by the chairman of Squibb Corporation, Squibb. That's before it was Bristol-Myers Squibb.
Yeah.
His name was Richard Furlow. And he said to me, Marvin, we would like to be your partner. I said, partner in what? We don't have a business yet. This again, I'm going back some time now. This is right after we started, 1985. And he said, we should talk. And so I met with representatives of Squibb, and they had a brand new manufacturing site in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And they also had a line of older injectable products that they weren't really promoting. They were milking the products. They were old, they were in their line, they were selling them, but they really weren't marketing or promoting them in any way. And he said, to get the company started, we could give you some of these older products to market, and that you would be responsible for manufacturing, quality control, regulatory. Squibb would be responsible for sales, marketing, and distribution. So even though we didn't have a lot of revenue when we went public, we had the Squibb partnership.
Which you disclosed, and you
Oh,
had,
yes.
you had
It was a big
expectations
deal.
around that. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, when I think about it now, you kind of refresh my memory, is that really enabled us to go public.
Right.
Because people didn't know Marsam.
Right.
But the joint venture we had was called Squibb Marsam.
Right.
It was a stacked logo. Squibb was on top. Marsam name was below it. And having Squibb as your partner gave us immediate credibility. It gave us immediate market acceptance. Nobody said, who's Marsam?
Yeah.
It's Squibb. It must be good.
Yeah.
And so we kind of used the theme, the best of both worlds. The entrepreneurial spirit of a small startup like Marsam,
Yeah.
and the experience and background and resources of an Squibb.
Yeah.
And so that partnership worked pretty well, and it really did help us go public. And so going back now to 87, when we went public, the offering went very well. You know, I started my roadshow on the West Coast, and we thought this stock would sell between $7 and $8 a share. We were selling 800,000 shares. And, you know, I did my roadshow along the West Coast, a lot of the institutional buyers out there, and then started moving east. And as you well know, you try to end up on the East Coast in Boston and New York, and then you do your pricing and do the deal.
Yeah.
And so as I came across the country, the interest in the stock was higher. And we were selling 800,000 shares, and you always want to overbook. And we thought, well, out of California, I had interest in over 1 million shares. And we got to Chicago and Minneapolis and Dallas. There's great interest in the deal. At that time, generics were hot. The Hatch-Waxman Act passed in 1984. So generic industry was growing. And by the time we got to New York and Boston, you know, we were talking about $12.50 to $15 a share.
Right.
And so we went public. I'm not exactly sure the price, but it was in that area. And within a month, it was around $23 a share. So we had a pretty successful IPO.
And at this stage, the one and only growth driver was the Squibb contract, or was there other R&D or other
Yeah, we had a
BD
number
initiatives?
of products that we were developing.
Okay.
We also, as part of the Squibb deal, they were making their penicillin products in different facilities. Right. They were doing some filling in Europe and labeling and packaging in North Carolina, and it wasn't very efficient. And I wanted to be in the antibiotic business, so I said, why don't we move everything to Cherry Hill? We'll do all the manufacturing of your penicillins, and then we added a line of cephalosporins. And so we had a number of applications pending, and we knew we had a market with the Squibb products. So when we put our model together, we included that.
How much of this business model was proven at that point, though? I mean, had you completed the transfers of the Squibb products? Had you validated your pipeline, or is this still the valuation still based on a promise that this will happen and you feel confident that it'll
It
play
was
out?
a little more than a promise because I think we may have had one or two site
Okay.
transfers, but we did have applications pending, and we had other suppliers doing contract manufacturing for us. We had SmithKline in Philadelphia, and then I used Squibb's facility as well.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to Agnes as a mentor of yours, what do you suppose she saw in you as a protege or as a mentee?
I don't know. I think that she knew that I was hardworking and honest. She knew that I was open to suggestions. She always told me I was creative. If there was a problem, Marvin can fix it.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's what she saw. She knew that I was going to be a good partner to her.
To be such a powerful, well-connected figure and a woman at that time was probably quite rare.
She was an amazing person. She really broke the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
You talk about immigrants. She was, I think, one of 8 or 12 children born to a Greek immigrant family. First one in her family to graduate from high school. First in her family to go to college. She graduated Brooklyn College with a degree in chemistry. And there weren't many women chemists then. She worked for a chemical company for a while, and then she realized that she'll never hit a home run unless she has her own business. And that's when she started Agvar Chemical.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Agvar, Agnes Varis, Marvin
All right,
Samson.
so there's a playbook.
She and her husband came up with the name Marsam.
You mentioned hitting home runs, but did you ever swing and miss?
Sure, every business has setbacks. I've had it with Marsam, had it with the company I have now, Samson Medical. Yeah, you have to take them as learning experiences and lessons, and part of it is figuring out how to get around these setbacks. Some of them were financial. Sometimes equipment wasn't delivered on time. There were penalties for not delivering orders on time, but never got us down. You know, if we had to say we somehow, some way, we got to figure out how to do this, fix it in a way that it won't happen again, and that's pretty much what we did.
Was there ever a time where one of these challenges threatened the very existence of the company? Did you feel the need to put on a brave face for your fellow employees, your management, your investors? How did you do that?
Yes, I mean you have to do that. You know, you can't be negative.
Yeah.
You know, as a leader, you have to be positive. You have to look at the good side of things. And I've always looked at things that way. You know, every step back is an opportunity to do better. And if you run into an issue and you solve it, you feel a lot better. Going back to almost present times with Samson Medical,
Yeah.
I know I'm jumping around.
No,
with
that's
it.
perfectly fine.
When I started Samson Medical, it was also to fill a need, but there was no pathway to get my product approved by the FDA that time. And I went to the FDA compliance people and I said, look, there's a need in hospitals for this product. How can I get it approved? And at that time, there was a provision in law to allow certain products to be used for compounding that do not require full regulatory approval. They have to be made in an FDA approved facility. The claims have to be the same as the branded or generic product. Dosages have to be the same. And so when I started a company, I started to market products with this compounding provision. And when I was very, very small, we were way below the radar. Nobody paid any attention to us. As the company grew, we took business away from one of the large multinationals. And they went to the FDA and they said that these are not approved products. In our opinion, they're misbranded or adulterated. And the FDA came in and gave us a pretty strong slap in the wrist because the law that I used to market the products had changed. It was overturned. And so we ended up destroying the product we had on hand because the FDA told us to. And that was a serious, serious setback. But the fact that I thought or knew that it was generated by a competitor, it made me fight even harder and more determination and more drive. And I guess I was hungry, really hungry. And I was going to show people we can get this product approved and we can be successful with it. So yeah, some setbacks are more difficult than others. Financially, it was hard. It was hard for the people I was working with, but we got through it.
How long did it take you to turn things around and to reapply and to get the regulator back on board?
Almost a year.
Okay.
But Samson Medical, it was almost like a sideline for me. I was working at that time for another company as well.
I heard that for the first 10 years of Samson Medical, you were donating the profits to scholarships and
Scholarships, yeah.
to philanthropy.
Yeah, as I just said, I'll tell you, I was working for Teva at the time. In the beginning it was SICOR, and then it was Teva. And I never thought this would be a company. The way that Samson Medical started was that I received a call from a hospital pharmacist in Boston who said that the hospitals in that area called the partners were looking for a way of delivering antibiotics. They had an infusion device. They had built a regional compounding center, and they had made arrangements with a large multinational to provide them bulk drug for them. And everything was set to go. And then the large multinational decided that it was risky to supply the bulk drug to this group of hospitals. So now they had made a capital investment in this facility. They had all these delivery devices. They had a system that I thought would really work. And they called me. I was working at SICOR at the time and said, can you help us find sources of these antibiotics, knowing that Marsam was in the antibiotic business. So I said, of course. And I went to Italy, to ACS Stopfar, my supplier, told them a little bit about the project. And I said that, I think there's a need for this. Can we work on it together? So when I did that, I was still working for Teva or SICOR at the time. And I thought, we'll do this on a very small basis, a regional basis, just in the Boston area. Never think it would really become a business. And over the years, it grew. And now we have a nice U.S. business. We sell in Canada. We sell in parts of Europe.
And what was special about ACS Stopfar? How did you arrive all the way in Italy at ACS?
They're probably the best antibiotic chemist in the world. They're based in Italy. Marco Falciani, who is the CEO, became a very good friend of mine, and we have been friends for more than 40 years. They never, ever compromise quality. I used them at Elkins-Sinn years ago. I used them at Marsam. And so it's just logical. If I'm looking for antibiotics, I would go back to people I know and I trust and people that will work with me. And to this day, they are my primary supplier.
Your expertise has been concentrated in injectables, which is known to be unforgiving, expensive, large payback cycles. How did you stay true to injectables and steriles despite all the difficulties? And we hear all of these stories about warning letters and consent decrees constantly. So it's a very difficult thing to do.
That's why I did it. Because when I first got into the business, I looked at the U.S. market, and there may have been close to 100 companies making tablets and capsules and oral liquids. And then I looked at the number of injectable companies, and there was less than 6. Why were there less than 6? For the reasons you just mentioned. The barriers to entry are much higher. The cost of manufacturing, remember, you're now building sterile suites, not just a compounding room. And so the fact the barriers to entry were higher, the business was tougher, really leads to higher margins and more profitable businesses. And so I thought that if I'm going to do anything, if I'm going to specialize in any area, I would like to do it in injectable products.
And for a while, you were presiding over one of the biggest manufacturers globally in SICOR. What made that business so special and ultimately led to Teva paying $3.5 billion for it?
A number of things. One, SICOR was vertically integrated. So we made the raw material as well as the finished dosage form. And so that gives you a leg up when you're applying for approval. Because remember, when you file an ANDA with the FDA, you have to refer to a drug master file. And there are a lot of questions in the application, and the DMF has to be, in that facility has to be approved by the FDA. So when you are vertically integrated like SICOR was, it's much easier to answer questions about both the API, the raw material, and the dosage form. So one benefit we had was vertical integration. Two, we were multinational. I was mentioning to you earlier that until the SICOR days, I was running US-based companies with one large market, one language, one currency. SICOR was different. We were multinational. So the same, and by the way, unlike tablets and capsules where you have different color, size, and shape, injectables, the formulations that may be sold in Canada or Mexico or Europe are usually the same or very similar. And so when we developed a product at SICOR for the US market, we looked at other markets at the same time. Can we sell it in Europe? Can we sell it in Mexico? Can we sell it in South America? So having the multinational aspect of SICOR was really a benefit.
There were some interesting moves, geographically speaking. I mean, it wasn't just neighboring countries into LATAM or Europe, but even as far afield as Lithuania. What was the thinking of going so far into Eastern Europe? I think that was post-Soviet, but pre-EU.
Right.
And did that play out ultimately for SICOR in a positive way?
Yep, absolutely. That was Carlos Salvi. Carlos Salvi was probably one of the best business partners I ever had. We were very close. He was almost like my third brother. And Carlo called me one day and he said that, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, a lot of these companies are privatized. And he had a vision. Carlo had the ability to see value where other people didn't. And he said to me, there's a biotech company in Lithuania, in Vilnius, that has very good technology. It's an old facility. It's a Russian-built facility. But they have really good people and good technology. Would you come and look at it with me? So I went to Lithuania with Carlo. And all through, when we were in the plane going to Lithuania, he kept saying, now, don't look at the facility. Don't look at the hole in the floor. Just look at the products, look at the technology, meet the people. So I went to Lithuania. It was an awful facility. I'll never forget. One of the consultant engineers I hired later described the building that if the termites stopped holding hands, it would collapse. That's the way he described the building.
That's encouraging.
And so Carla was right. It had potential. The first thing we did was actually hire a Swedish firm to build a new facility for us.
From scratch?
From scratch. Fully compliant with GMPs, fully compliant with what the EU and the FDA were looking for.
At that time, Lithuania was not part of the EU or was a candidate country for the EU?
I'm not sure when they got into the EU, but it was very close.
Okay.
I don't think I think if it is, it's just about the same time.
Okay, so it was harmonizing already standards.
Starting to harmonize, I think, and they were starting to upgrade the roads and the banking systems and a whole bunch of other things there. And so we built a new facility and we began making product. And we developed, we were selling a number of products at that time, but mostly interferon alpha-2b, human growth hormone, but then we developed GCSF.
All right.
And we were the first to develop the product, and we were not able to really finish the development because unlike standard generics where you just have to do a bioequivalence study, the biologic world is very, very different and required clinical studies. We could not afford to do clinical studies. And so after we developed the API, we made a deal with a German company, and they would finish the development and eventually market a product, and they paid us a license fee. And at that time of our development, it was $1 million fee, which was, again, more money than we dreamed of in those days. So that's kind of why we're in Lithuania, and it's turned out to be a very, very good investment for us.
Yeah. So SICOR is described as one of Teva's best performing acquisitions in its history. How did you know the time was right to sell? I know you aren't always in control of these things, right? As a big public company, there's interest at different times. But being a former M&A banker, I know that many stars need to align. What stars aligned for the exit or the acquisition of SICOR?
You feel it. There's a feeling it's time to sell, or we can sell. We don't have to sell. The business is strong. The business is profitable. We didn't have to sell. And when we were talking to companies about licensing, like the GCSF, when I was looking for new products, people asked about SICOR. Our major product in the U.S. then was propofol, and we did quite well with propofol. And so I think with SICOR, one of our suppliers, was actually Novartis at the time, said that, if you're ever thinking of selling, we would like to do that. We would be interested. And remember, at that time, the two largest generic companies in the world were Sandoz, which was part of Novartis, and Teva. And they were competitors worldwide. And both wanted to get into the U.S. generic injectable market. Both had interest in oncology products. And so most of our negotiations were with Novartis. And Teva came in very late. And as you know, we ended up selling the company to Teva.
And you remained at Teva for quite some time.
Yes.
How was that different to your previous experience? I mean, this was now a giant multinational. You probably had to deal with different structures, maybe, by definition, slower decision-making than perhaps you were used to when you were running your own business or even at SICOR. How did life change for you?
Well, Teva in those days was pretty entrepreneurial. Israel Markov was the CEO. We made the deal with Israel Markov. My job wasn't what I expected. When Teva bought the company, they asked me if I would stay. And Carlos Salvi became a board member of Teva, Teva's main board. And Markov said, there's plenty of work for you to do globally. You don't have to work in the U.S. And he gave me the title of Group Vice President of Worldwide Injectables. I think that was my title. I'm not even sure. And I worked on injectable drugs in Europe first. And then wherever there was a need, he sent me. And one day he said to me, the second largest market in the world is Japan, and we are not there. Teva has to be in Japan. And so he said, look, set up a team, and we're going to open a subsidiary in Japan. And that's what I did. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was getting into. I'd never been in Japan before. And we set up a team, and we went to Japan. Our initial thought was to manufacture products in Teva facilities, apply for Japanese registration, and begin selling products there, because in Japan at that time, generic penetration was very low. But we knew that it was going to increase. We knew there was pressure to reduce the cost of drugs in Japan as well. And so that's how we started. We started to try to register products made in Teva facilities, US FDA-approved facilities around the world. And then after some period of time, we decided that the only way to really have a meaningful share of the Japanese market was to make an acquisition, and we did.
You've had success in all forms of business, it seems, public and private, US, international. What do you think has been your greatest asset that has facilitated that success? And do you think or if it's more than one, do you think these are assets or qualities that you're born with, or some things that you have had to work really hard on over the years?
I think one of my greatest assets was listening. I used to tell my kids all the time that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen more and talk less. Um, I always listened. I always wanted to learn. Everything, every day was a learning experience. And I learned from everyone around me. I learned from my employees. I learned from my children. I learned from my grandchildren. I learned from competitors. I think if you listen and you learn and you try to do things the right way, if you treat people well, if you encourage them, it works. If you have an attitude of gratitude, gratitude is important. It's amazing how far you can get just saying hello to your employees and learning their names, walking down a production line, and if you know someone was ill, how do you feel today kind of thing. It's those little things that people remember. And I've always cared a great deal about my employees. And I always felt that, success is not an accident. It does take hard work. It does take dedication. It takes good people and people working together. And so I think my approach has always been not a CEO sitting in a front office. I want to walk around the plant every day. I want to see what's happening on the line. I want to know what they need to make their job easier, to make our product better, to take care of our customers, to treat people the way they should be treated.
And when you look at your various priorities, because I'm sure growing at such a rapid rate, you needed to find ways to prioritize your activities. There's only 24 hours in the day. Where did you rank the people aspect versus, for example, capital deployment or growth strategy, etc., investor relations?
Pretty high. At the very top, probably, because I can't do it alone. If you have the right people in the right place at the right time, you do well.
So that's an interesting point to transition into people. How did you identify the right people and talent specifically?
And I think I looked for people that were not full of themselves.
Okay.
I'll never forget once I was interviewing a person for a business development position. Director of Business Development was the title. And I had tons of resumes because the company was doing well and we were publicly held and people saw that we were doing well. And a young man came in and he looked great, dressed beautifully, spoke beautifully, did not have a lot of experience, had just gotten out of business school. And he went to one of the top business schools in the States. And he reminded me of that about 4 times during the interview. And at the very end of the interview, he said to me, the title is Director of Business Development. He says, don't you think, since I'm a graduate of this school, I should be Vice President of Business Development? I said, you haven't earned anything yet. How can you even think of being a vice president? So it's an example of what turns me off.
Right.
I'd rather have somebody hungry that says, give me a shot.
Yeah.
Let me have this job. Let me show you what I can do.
Yeah.
That would make me feel a lot better.
Even if they were hungry, but not necessarily fully competent in
right.
in
didn't have to go to the best schools. Didn't have to just, if they really wanted to do a good job, if they really cared about what they were doing, cared about the product they were producing, asked a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Like, so many people make products and they have no idea what they're for.
Right.
So when someone say, what's it used for? Or why is this step critical?
Yeah.
That to me, it showed me that they really were interested and cared.
That intellectual curiosity is so powerful. Even in our business, I see just the interest in improving could lead to greater effectiveness in a process. It could lead to optimization. It could lead to new product ideas. It's not something you can train. It's something that I find people...
It's a gut. It's feeling, I was saying to you earlier, sometimes you really have to follow your gut.
Yeah.
Because I think you'll do better. Yeah.
And what about leading in areas where you aren't necessarily comfortable, where you're not an expert?
I think if you're not the expert in a room, you have to have someone you can rely on, and you have to have the right people working with you. And again, you have to listen, and you have to learn, and you have to. It's hard to present something if you don't really know it or understand it. You have to be prepared to answer questions. And a lot of times, if I were doing, like you were mentioning, public offering, I had never done a public offering. And in those days, it's not like you have computers and all kinds of PowerPoint presentations. We used to use an overhead projector
With the slides
with
and
the slide,
writing
and you
yeah.
would write on it. I mean, you couldn't just change a number
Yeah.
at the last minute. So you had to really be very careful to make sure what you were saying was correct and you can back it up. And you have to be honest with people. Not everything works. And so, I used to almost like rate things as probability. What's the chance we'll really get this approval at this time? And because you miss approvals. And so I would always give myself somewhat of a little cushion. If I thought I was going to do 10 million on a product, I would say 8 to 9.
Right.
I didn't want to say 12 or 14. I'd rather just be cautious.
You had a very interesting example around shared ownership and creating incentives. And there's a Charlie Munger quote that says, "Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." Can you describe a little bit about the options program that you had at Marsam and
Sure.
the impact that had on everyone from the highest executives down to the person who was cleaning the office?
Yeah, when I started Marsam, I was lucky. I was able to recruit a number of people. Many worked with me at ESI before, people I knew in the industry. And they had confidence, and they had faith in me, and they came to work in a dream. There was nothing there yet. And so when we went public, as I said, in 1987, I said to my board, I would like to give every employee a stock option, every level, not just executives, not just vice presidents or directors and above, every single person that works here. As you said, the person that mops the floor to the senior VP. I really felt that it was the greatest incentive. Ownership was the greatest incentive to keep people motivated, excited about the company, and stay with the company. And so I gave everyone stock options. Many people that received options had no idea what a stock option was. And to use your example that I mentioned to you earlier today, I had a cleaning woman that would clean the offices in the morning before we started working. And in those days, the Wall Street Journal was delivered in the morning. And everyone knew our stock price. And this cleaning person opened the Wall Street Journal. She had never even read the journal, but she knew how to find our stock price. And we were down 1/4 of a point. And she put a question mark next to it and left the paper open on my desk when I came in that day. And I'll never forget that as long as I live. She cared enough to ask the question. And to this day, I meet people that say, I was able to buy my home on the money I made on the Marsam stock option, or I educated my children on the money we made on the option. The month after we sold the company, because it was a cash deal, everyone got cash for their options. And so the parking lot of our facility looked like a Lexus dealership. And that made me feel good. You say, what makes you feel good? What's rewarding? To think that I was able to touch all those lives. We were able to, not alone, my team, the company. And that's a great feeling. And here it's 20 years later, and people still talk about the Marsam deal.
Did you get any pushback from your investor base or your board around this idea? Because obviously it creates a degree of dilution, or were they willing to trust you on this decision?
They were willing to trust me. Look, it's not like I gave real large options to people. Obviously, the number of shares they received was really based on their position in the company. But no, because I think the incentive we got was well worth it. And we couldn't offer at the time a lot of the benefits many of the pharma companies were offering. So some of the people I hired from large pharma, they would say, well, do you have this? Do you have a 401k? Do you have a long-term compensation plan? We didn't have those things. But I said, if we do well, you could really do well in a stock option.
And were you able to articulate what doing well would mean? Or, I mean, did you have, I understand you had a general plan, but were you able to communicate it in a way that would make sense at different levels? You know, I'm from experience, I know that different parts of the company have different motivations. For example, not everybody is necessarily interested in our long-term strategic plans. They may be more interested in their compensation and job security.
Right. Yeah, I was. I would talk to people, first of all. I guess I'm a people person.
Yeah.
I like to eat lunch with the employees in the cafeteria. I like to, people work overtime, bring them pizza at night and sit down and talk to them. When I first talked about stock options and people had no idea what a stock option was, I gave them a very basic set of numbers. I said, look, if we earn $1 million, and the multiple at that time was 10, I'm just making up a number, that makes our company worth $10 million. And I said, so depending on how well we do, the stock price should reflect that. And if it does, you can make money. And so it was important for us to, when we had a quarterly review with shareholders, I also had a quarterly review with employees. I told them where we were, what products we're relying on, who were the most important customers, and explained to them the importance of making investments in the company. If we need a new piece of equipment, it may affect what we're doing now, but in the long run, it'll be better for us. And try to explain how we were using the capital that we had. If we were doing a licensing deal, once we get this product approved, it could mean profits to us. And believe it or not, everyone understood. Even people that were not educated, when they would see numbers, 1 times 10 equals this, they understood. And keeping them posted was important.
What about challenging news, difficulties, setbacks? If there was a tough quarter, how were you able to communicate that without instilling maybe panic or concern?
Explain when I made a mistake. For instance, when I first became CEO of SICOR, and we would have our quarterly investor calls. First, I made a big mistake because SICOR was based in Irvine, California. And instead of doing an investor call early in the morning at 9 o'clock East Coast time, I did 9 o'clock or 7 o'clock West Coast time. So it was after the market opened. That was one thing. These are all lessons I learned the hard way. And then we had an investor relations department that did a really good job. One of their jobs was to write and review all press releases. We had a legal department. We reviewed everything. But for that quarter, the company overall did pretty well. In Mexico, we didn't do as well. And so in the press release, there was just one line that said we had a weakness in Mexico, like we were down 6 or 8% in Mexico. Never used the word weakness because with all the good news in the press release that our sales for the quarter were up, what Wall Street focused on was weakness in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Never realized that Mexico was less than 10% of our total revenue. But they only focused on that. And the stock went down about $3 a share that day. When I got on the investors call, every question was about Mexico. And so again, that was a lesson learned. Now, of course, the stock came back, but, I did explain to employees that I screwed up, that, I didn't realize that because I approved a press release as well, that's what they would focus on. So these are all learning experiences, I guess.
When you go back and look at publicly listed companies and investor relations and having to explain that, I mean, that sounds like it was quite a significant effort to explain to investors and to take responsibility for that. That's hours out of your day that you could have been doing something else.
Yep.
So how do you feel about running a public company in that regard versus a private?
You'll think I'm crazy, but look, my company now, of course, is private.
Right.
But I liked running a public company. I didn't feel the pressure people think. You know, I felt as long as I'm honest, as long as I'm doing the right thing, you'll do well. And the truth is, most of the money I've made was on the sale of stock, not on pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And Carlos Salvi, when he first bought Gencia, and we had Gencia SICOR, we became public. SICOR became a public company, and he was the CEO. And so the first quarter, he didn't quite understand the U.S. public market. He was either CEO or vice chairman of the board. I forgot his title. But our first investor meeting, people were asking him questions. And he was an Italian-Swiss national that had a very private life. And in his mind, it's nobody's business how much money he makes, how many shares he owns, what related party transactions he has. And so after that first meeting, he called me and said, Marvin, how do you put up with being a public company? It's a pain in the ass. I'm not going to do it, he said. Will you do it? And that's how I really became the CEO of SICOR. But I didn't mind questions like that because I had nothing to hide and the rewards were great because if the company really does well, you know, you can make some money.
What about educating investors? I mean, you do get specialist healthcare investors, you know, who get it. But were there ever investors who didn't? And you know, you have to execute on a strategy, but you also need to explain. Did that take up a lot of your time?
You can't choose who's going to follow your company. And some get it, as you said, and some do not. First of all, one of the negatives of being a public company is the amount of time it takes. Even if you have a good investor relations department, they want to hear from the CEO. They want to see the CEO. They want to talk to the CEO. And so I always made myself available. The knowledgeable analyst got it. The ones that didn't, I would spend more time with them. I would bring them to our manufacturing facility. I would show them how the products are made. I would explain why we're making certain statements. And if you ask me a percentage for a while there, especially with SICOR, I was spending about 20-25% of my time with Wall Street issues. Or if you ever do a secondary offering, that's a tremendous amount of preparation and time. And not only do you have to have the right, you know, work with the right analyst and talk to them and make sure they understand, you have to work with the right bankers as well, people that understand your business. And so I was fortunate. The bankers we used, the analysts that followed our companies were very fair. And so, but again, I never would dodge a phone call. I would never not answer a question, even if it wasn't the most positive thing in the world. I said, look, we recognize we have an issue here and we're going to fix it.
Yeah, there's definitely a theme of radical accountability that comes through, be it to your employees, be it to your management, to your investors. That's a very clear trait that shines through your story.
Well, because people have faith in you. Part of their investment's in you. You know, when I went public with Marsam, the banker said to me, I'm taking Marvin Samson public. That's what he said, you know?
Yeah, so a big part of the story was you. And
was my track record. See, as you have a track record, it gets easier. First one is the hardest.
Yeah.
Marsam was easier because Elkins-Sinn was successful.
Right.
SICOR was a little easier because Marsam and ESI were successful.
So the industry has shifted quite dramatically over the last 6 decades. What for you has been some of the most profound things that have changed?
On a generic side, most of the generic companies were very entrepreneurial, started by their founders, and almost like family-run companies. There weren't professional managers. It was like almost like a mom and pop store that became a pharma company. It's very different now. You have more private equity ownership. You have more corporate ownership, so it's not the same. I know that when I first started, my competitors were my friends, and my first few investment conferences, I knew the people that were presenting, but again, they were mostly like a family business. It was a father and their sons or whatever. That's not the case today. So that is one change that it's very clear. Today, it's probably harder to be a public company today than when we did it at ESI or Marsam.
I was thinking, I'm not sure how big the Indian pharma companies were in generics.
Oh, no,
then.
that's a big difference. You're
They're now-
right. You're absolutely right. Look, when I got into the business, we didn't have Indian or Chinese competition. We were competing with domestic suppliers. Price was an issue, but it wasn't crazy. There was enough room to make money. You're right. It's quite different now.
Yeah.
If you look at the U.S. generic business or the number of generic prescriptions filled in the U.S., I mean, generics are more than probably 95% of prescriptions filled. Most of those products are coming from India and now some from China. So you don't have the U.S. competition we used to have. Look, when I got in this business, many of the raw material suppliers were also U.S. Now there isn't one U.S. company making the antibiotics that I sell. Part of it was environmental laws. A lot of the solvents that were used can no longer be used. So, yeah, the business has changed dramatically when you really think of the influence of the Indian, Chinese competition. It's different.
It seems now to succeed more than ever, you need to have either a biosimilar or biologic strategy to catch the patent expiries of the big biologics of yesteryear, or you need to be vertically integrated into API and then be able to develop the API early and launch, be ready for day one launch cheaper than anybody else. But both of these things require scale and huge capital investments. Would you agree? Or is there still other ways in which you can be successful in this industry?
Something unique, delivery systems.
Right.
You look at some of the drugs today, you were talking about drugs like Ozempic before. Just having auto injectors, that made a difference. But many of the Indian companies are vertically integrated, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Most of them.
Yeah.
And biologics, that was the next class of drugs. And so they're more difficult. As I said, they're harder to develop. They require clinical studies. The cost of developing a biologic is so much greater than an ordinary generic product. So, yeah, that's a very big change.
And that's reserved for the few with the deep pockets?
Right. You need deep pockets to do it.
Yeah.
The reason I think that SMT, Samson Medical, does well is because we have a unique package. Delivery systems are important, but you have to show that your product's cost effective.
Yeah.
There's some delivery systems that are really great, but you have a delivery system costing $3 for a $1 drug.
Right.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. We see that with either extended release or transdermal or transmucosal, which on paper looks great, but from a pricing perspective may not be enough.
Exactly.
We cannot get them reimbursed.
Exactly. I remember years ago, everyone was saying, let's do more pre-filled syringes.
Right.
But again, if you have a very inexpensive product and you put it into a very expensive syringe,
Yeah.
it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Looking forward, what excites you about the industry and the trends, say, in the next decade or so?
I think you mentioned biologics, and there will be more and more biologics, and there will be more generic type biologics and biosimilars. I like the delivery system idea. I guess the business is different today than it was years ago, but I still believe that if you have the right product at the right time and you can be competitive, you'll do well with it. There will be more companies using contract manufacturing because manufacturing sites are so expensive and so hard to run. So I think that's why contract manufacturing is doing pretty well. You look at a product like we're talking about, Ozempic type products, no one could keep up with the quantity.
Yeah.
And so there are a number of companies doing contract manufacturing of those products.
Right. Right. Yeah, that supply chain seems to already be under pressure.
Right.
And it remains to be seen how effective oral treatments will be. I know there's issues around absorption and things like that, but you never know. That could ease the bottleneck somewhat.
Right.
Looking at your career, so you're 84 and a half years young.
Yes. What am I doing here? Is that the question?
With no signs of slowing down. What's been your secret to longevity and sustainability over the years?
I guess liking what you do, loving the business, having fun. Every day is exciting. Even now with my little company, if we get a new customer, I'm excited. Get a large order, I'm excited. A big check comes in, I'm excited.
Yeah, sure.
It's fun to run a business. Yeah. It's fun to be in business. And to make money and do good things at the same time is great. And I think that's the strength of the generic industry. And even the business I'm in now, we are able to save hospitals money. And we have a safer product. And patient safety is very, very important. And so if you could accomplish those things and still have fun at it, it's, why would I stop?
Reading up and getting to know you, I've noticed that philanthropy is something you pursue as intensely as your professional career.
Yes.
How has that shifted, the concept of giving back? How has that shifted from childhood to today? How has it evolved? And what has remained the same?
I'm not sure if it shifted. Look, I always felt that if you do well, you have to do good things. You mentioned earlier that when I first started SMT, I gave all the profits away. I gave them to pharmacy schools, to universities to use for scholarships, for internships, for residencies, because I had to go to night school. I couldn't afford to go to, pharmacy school. And so giving those scholarships away just makes me feel good. I mentioned to you earlier that I sponsor a number of STEM programs. And one of our STEM students went to medical school. And that's something that, all the money in the world couldn't buy, And so philanthropy is important because I'm able to share what I have, and hopefully I'll influence people in a positive way.
One of the most moving moments for me listening to your story was when you mentioned that you couldn't afford to go to the pharmacy school, and years later you became a member of the board of trustees.
I became president.
President.
And chairman of the board, you're right.
President and chairman of the board of trustees of that very same school.
Right.
That must have been a remarkable full circle moment for you.
I didn't really think of it that way. We're talking about the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. part of the University of the Sciences, which is now part of St. Joe's University. I wanted to be a pharmacist. It wasn't taught at night, and so I ended up going to Temple at night as a chemistry major. But I always had great love and interest for pharmacy. And even though I wasn't in pharmacy school, I took some courses at PCP, Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. And a number of years later, the president of the school called me and asked me to be on his board. And I accepted. And I was on the board for 29 years. I became chairman of the board. And then when he retired, he asked me to step in as interim president, which, by the way, I did twice. And I thought, how can I be president of a university? You know, I can't spell academic. You know, I just thought, this is crazy. But when I got into it, it was like business. I mean, I didn't stop my business career, by the way. I still had my company, but I started every day at the university. I went to the university first. Every day. And then I went to my office in the afternoon. But, you know, being president of a university is very different. You're dealing with different things. You're dealing with academics. You're dealing with tenure. You're dealing with students. You know, you were asking me about the time I spent with investor relations.
Yeah.
You can't imagine the amount of time a university president spends with fundraising. I was in a unique position. I was both a donor and a fundraiser.
Right.
And so I kind of reversed things in my head and saying, look, what turns me on as a donor? How do I use that to raise money for the university?
Yeah.
I loved being the university president too. I had a ball. We were a Division II school. I went to all the basketball games and volleyball games and baseball games and had fun at it. You know?
When you look back at your 18-year-old self, still trying to figure things out, trying to fund that education, is there any advice you would give the young Marvin today?
Follow your gut. Do what you like. Be the best at what you do. Don't settle. Don't compromise. Do it the right way the first time. You know, there's so many examples that I saw in my business career where people just took a shortcut and it never paid off in the long run. And so I guess I learned a lot from my mother. As you mentioned, was an immigrant, came here when she was 17 from Ukraine, which was then Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And she was hardworking. She learned English quickly. Her handwriting was like script. She was like a calligrapher. And I think the values that she taught me is really what I've lived by, you know. And even now at this age, if I receive an award or we're dedicating a wing to a hospital or something, I keep thinking, I wish you were here to see it. So, you know, an 18-year-old Marvin, I don't know what, but I think it's the same things I see today I saw then.
And if you look back at your legacy, what would you like to be remembered for the most?
All the good things I could do. You know, when you work hard and you're successful, that's good. You can provide for your family, you can have nice things. But if you can help others, if you can affect other lives, if you could do what we're doing now, you know, we do a lot of good things through our foundation. And you were right. I didn't think of it until you just mentioned it, that I probably feel as good about that as I do about my business career.
Yeah.
So it feels good to give. And I think the donor feels better than the recipient.
That's good. So I think that's as good a place to leave it as anywhere. Thank you so much. You've always been very generous with your time. Whether I'm calling you to complain or to vent or to seek guidance, but this time that you've spent in preparing for this discussion and giving off your time, thank you very much. I really highly, highly appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
If I can summarize a few things that I've learned so far from this discussion and through the years of working with Marvin, I would say, number one, Marvin has universal respect and admiration across the industry, regardless of continent. I am highly impressed by the ability to build relationships across cultures in different parts. I mean, there's a comment that you made around your competitors being your friends. That's not an easy feat to achieve. I know it was a different time, but that's remarkable. The enduring and deep love for the industry shines through. And of course, when I asked you that question, what kept the fire burning for the last 6 decades? Without love for the subject matter, there's no way you would still be at it, and have been through the cycles of the various startups and the public company. And there's no signs of slowing down. The third is the generosity of giving off your time, of the philanthropic initiatives, and the meaningful impact it has on the environment. That's very clear, and it's a driver from a very young age that doesn't come naturally to many people, but did for yourself. And then finally, it's how clear and thoughtful you are when discussing various topics, be it business, be it the industry, be it philanthropy. I really appreciate that. And speaking to you actually evokes more curiosity around the subject matter. You have this way of explaining concepts in such a collected manner. Thank you very much again for your time. And
Thank you.
I hope to make more time to sit down. And as I mentioned, I could go on for hours and hours, but I'll relieve you for now of that burden. And so thank you very much.
You're welcome. How do you think it's going?
Great. I love it.
No.
I want to be respectful of your time, but I could listen to this and I could ask these questions for hours and hours. And
Really?
hours, so yeah. So if you are getting tired, please.
No, I'm not
let me know.
tired
Yeah.
at all.